Jacopo Lohs. Thank you for having me here. Don't be scared about my handout. We won't read everything. It's quite long, and I will just say the number of the text we are reading. So, the unity of being for Aristotle is not of a conceptual nature. For this reason, being is not a genus. As the concept of a genus is predicated of species but not of the differences among them, being, on the contrary, is predicated of all entities and their differences. Animality, as such a genus, is predicated of both humans and horses, but not of the differences among them, such as rationality and quadrupedal nature. Thus, the categories are not the species of a higher genus constituted by being, but are the genera of entities above which there is no other common genus. The partial irreducibility of the categories combined with the multivocity of being do not qualify the latter as a mere name, making it an equivocal term, homonymia, equivocus in the scholastic. If we were to admit complete equivocity, communication would be impossible, as each thing that could be spoken of would have in common only the name of being, but not common references capable of conveying meaning. For these reasons, Aristotle finds the unity of the multiple meanings of being, first and foremost, in its dependence of the first category, that which of existence, ousia substantia in Latin, which expresses what something is through an identity predication between the subject and predicate. The answer to the question, what is something, provides a definition of the thing, establishing an essential relationship between subject and predicate. All other categories, apart from that of substance, do not essentially identify the subject, but rather qualify it, quantify it, describe a relation such as fatherhood, for instance, or provide a location. In these cases, the relationship between subject and predicate is not essential, but merely accidental, express attributions. The problem of being and its predicability has been a specific interest of metaphysics, and long after Aristotle, has been a subject of continuous debate in the philosophical tradition. One of the most illustrious examples of medieval debate spanning the 13th and 14th centuries is represented, as we saw yesterday with Dr. Smith, by the thought of Jonathan Scotus. The issue concerning being is addressed in a unique way. Scottish defense of the Univocity is based on the assumption that two things can be primarily different in reality, even they are not conceptually. Even though the univocal concept of being ends is a real concept, as it has been abstract from the actual essence of something accessible to the senses, this did not conclude univocity outside the soul. Thus, the univocity of being is primarily a conceptual matter and not a matter of reality outside the soul. Scotus starts with the Aristotelian definition of univocity found in the categories. In his Questiones super predicamenta Aristotelis, he defines univocal as those terms that are truly said, of which both common name and the same according to the name, the ratio substantiae is the same. Without mentioning the definition of univocity, in his Ordinatio, Scotus develops two conditions to support univocity, which link it to the principle of non contradiction. A concept is univocal if possesses a sufficient unity such that a contradiction can be verified by affirming and denying the same thing concerning the same concept. A univocal concept is sufficient as the middle term of a syllogism to avoid the fallacy of equivocation in the connection between the two terms. Only by starting from these conditions can we understand Scotus' argument known as the conceptu certo et dubio. The principle of non contradiction holds fundamental importance also in Francis of Meyron reflection, to the extent that one could argue that, regardless of the type of knowledge, intuitive, abstractive, and so on, it ensures the validity of all knowledge. The truth of this principle is included in the primum principium complexum as the first principle and concerns the entire creation, since it closely pertains to the possibility of predicated being in a non contradictory manner. Meron believes that predications such as creature are either necessary or not necessary, contingent or not contingent, can be directly deduced from this principle. Furthermore, this principle is valid even in relation to God, to whom can be applied statements like God is eternal or not eternal. The reason for its validity, both horizontally and vertically, between creatures and from them to the Creator, is that the subject of his principle, which is being, possesses the same ratio whether it is applied to God or when it is said of creatures. Text 1 talked about this the thing. We won't read text 1, I think. Yes. From a metaphysical standpoint, the latter argument has a very important implication. Indeed, both God and creature fall under a single idea of being. Otherwise, no non-contradictory statement about God would be possible. In fact, Meron concludes shortly, ex quo enim sub eadem ratione formali invenitur in Deo et creatura, sequitur quod unum et idem invenitur in Deo et creatura. In this sense, the predicate of the primum principium complexum is a suitable object for the intellect. The validity of all human knowledge of natural things presupposes the truth of his principle, the removal of which would not lead to any natural knowledge of God and would also destroy the physical proof of his existence, since we would be unable to trace back to a primum movens. The extremes of a contradiction are incompatible due to the contradictoriness of the same formal rationes of the terms, regardless the reality with which something manifests itself. Meron says that these extremes inherently possess a repugnance, and, and in the case of a most perfect nature, this repugnance is even more pronounced. If God's infinity were to eliminate the sense of contradiction, this elimination would apply to every contradictory predication. So one could simultaneously assert his eternity and non eternity, his infinity and non infinity. The conclusion is that in God, the principle of non-contradiction holds by the very nature of the thing. In Meroni's demonstration of univocity within the prologues of the Conflatus, he omits both the conditions that Scotus sets for univocity and the continuation of his argument. Every entity is either said equivocally or univocally, as they are immediately opposed by definition, tertium non datur. There is no middle ground between having or not the same ratio formalis. Furthermore, Merones argued that the concept of being cannot be conceived by the intellect except as an inferior, equal, or superior concept in comparison to other concepts. Since being can be predicated of many realities, it must be a superior concept to the others. In fact, any intellect that has one certain concept composable with two other concepts about which is doubtful, conceives that concept as distinct and communicable in comparison to the two about which there is doubt. There is doubt, and as communicable that the concept is also univocal. And the text too, you can see the Maroni's proof of univocity that we saw yesterday in the Conflatus. So we'll go on. In the demonstration of the Ordinatio, Scotus' conclusion consists of two different parts. The first, ergo conceptus entis est aliter ab utroque, emphasized that the concept of ends is distinct from the proper concept of God and the proper concept of creatures. The second part, et salvatur in utroque, ergo est conceptus univocus, concludes that the common concept of being between the two is univocal in relation to the proper concept. The historical philosophical interpretation of Scotus' doctrine of the univocity of being has often associated this theoretical aspect with a new conception of metaphysics, elevating it to the primary science of ens in quantum ens, and onto theology transcendent and science, transforming the Aristotelian conception of theology, which was concerned with immaterial being, into a theology also concerned with material being, emphasizing the significance of univocity as the origin of development of modern metaphysics. As Dumontin noticed, this point of view tends to stress the importance of the concept of transcendentality and to regard Scotus' innovation more as a break with, rather than a stage in, the medieval Aristotelian tradition. Dumont's argument highlights that this viewpoint is not the only way to analyze Scotus' doctrine of univocity, and furthermore, it was not even Scotus' viewpoint, probably. The reflection is fundamental when considering the immediate debate following Scotus. Maironis focuses on Scotus' conclusion regarding univocity of the concept, emphasizing univocity of the concept itself without highlighting, at least the first stage, the diversity of proper concept of God and creature. In fact, when responding to those who argue that there are two concepts, Mairon exerts all his efforts in emphasizing how the concept of being is one certain for the intellect, different alium univocal, univocum. It is true that his certainty of univocal concept of being is not related to a specific concept, but rather to a concept that arises ex communibus, and only is in this sense is univocal. He primarily dedicates his argumentative effort to describe the univocal concept of being, the main characteristic of which can be summarized as certus idem apud omnes ex communibus generalis communis abstractus a conceptu absoluti et respectivi. Another clarification regarding this concept is that it should be not understood as an act of understanding, but as a quantitative concept. This concept should not be thought of as a concept of reason alone. It is too, though, in fact, pro quidditate cognita ad quam terminatur actus intellectus, vel pro ratione quidditativa ad quam terminatur actus intelligenti. In the second question of the prologue of the Conflatus, Mairones clarifies the manner in which the term concept referring to being should be understood, and how it can be predicated univocally when, in the context of the primum principium complexum, it is related to both God and creatures. The concept does not mean concept as an act of the intellect, does not mean concept as an ens rationis, because the question pertains to an essential predicate which ens rationis is not. By concept, Maironis means a quiditative concept. This concept cannot be thought as an obiecto in esse cognito because it is a product of reasons. Referred to being, the concept must be understood as the quidditas known to which the act of understanding terminates, or, in other words, the quiditative ratio itself. According to this precise definition of concept, Mairon states that being has a single and univocal concept for both God and creatures. Before understanding how to place and interpret Mairon's defense of univocity, it is necessary to present how Mairon conceives terms such as equivocals, univocals, and denominatives. To trace this definition, it is necessary to refer to his commentary on Aristotle's categories, where the first three passus are dedicated to defining this term. In Aristotle's categories, equivocal terms, equivoca in Latin, are defined in the correspondence of name with a different meaning. Synonymy univocus, on the other hand, indicates a correspondence of both name and substantial ratio. In the context of how being can be said, the question is whether it is not a mere equivocal to cur, or if it is not a merely equivocal, meaning it does not fall into the broader meaning of homonymy. Syrian, an interpreter of Aristotle, interprets the second possibility, accompanying homonymy with the adverb haplos, stating that being is equivocal, but not in the manner of the category. Instead, it is a homonymo pros n. Mairon defines equivocal terms as those terms quorum nomen et solum commune est secundum illud nomen substantiae ratio diversa, ut animal homo et quod dipingitur. He presents four different types of equivocation. In his commentary on the categories, Simplicius divides equivocal terms into homonyms by intention and plain homonyms known by chance. The equivocal homonymy that derives from intention are further divided into four different types: by similarity, by analogy, by derivation, and then the fourth type, two things that are related to a common purpose, as in saying healthy for both food and medicine. On the other hand, Mairones consider equivocation either simplex or secundum quid, mentioning the division between intentional and by chance equivocity. Concerning equivocation secundum quid, also posits two ways to understand secundum quid, which, according to the first, secundum quid is literal, as when man is said of the dead only in a diminished sense, conferring to attribution to one, in a definition that seems to include analogous by attribution among equivocals. On the contrary, the other way to understand secundum quid is only partial and classifies the equivocal under univocity. Text 4. Dicitur autem simplex et secundum quid intelliguntur duobus modis, aut quando secundum quid dicitur diminute sive subtractive, sicut in proposito, et sic est quarta species, quia homo mortus non dicitur homo nisi in attributione ad hominem verum, aut quando secundum quid accipitur partialiter, sicut albus dentes secundum quid dicitur albus, et istud non est equivocum, sed univocum, licet partialiter. This kind of univocity is the sort of aliqualiter univocum or secundum quid univocum. Scotus' own theory of univocity is based on this kind of univocity and could be found also at the end of the prologue in the Ordinatio. And Myroni's definition of univocal terms starts with the Aristotelian one, according to which terms are univocal when they are not only share the same name but also the substantial ratio. Univocal predication occurs when, for example, animality is said of both humans and oxen, because it is understood in the same way in both cases. Univoca, text 5, univoca dicuntur quorum nomen et commune est, et secundum illud nomen e adem substantiae ratio, ut animal homo bos, capitulo primo. It would seem, therefore, that for univocity to occur, it is sufficient for the univocates to have the same common essence, just as brutes have the same essence in animals. In this case of univocals, the substantial essence is also understood as quiddity. An interesting objection relates to the fact that two individuals of the same species can only have the same substantial essence, and yet, when the same proper name, like John, is applied to both of these individuals, it is not said univocally. The two individuals share the same essence according to the name of their species as human, but not when it comes to proper names. And Meronis says, text 6, that individua talia habent quidem unam rationem secundum nomen sua speciei, sed non in quantum nomina propria sunt eis communia, nisi forte aliquod accidens, unde, I'm sorry for that typo, as unde, obviously, sic appellentur sit eis commune et tunc foret univocatio in illo accidente, sicut 2 Ioannes in gratia fuerunt equales. This text leads, or at least presupposes, different level, combined with the thing we said before, of univocity. It is important to emphasize that the concept of being is a quiditative concept, but this does not mean that we know the quiddity of God, because in Simplicitre Simplicibus and Prima Diversis, the concept of being is included denominatively. Text 7. In Simplicitre Simplicibus et in Primo Diversis includitur ens denominative secundum quod est adjectivum e non quiditative. Nec oportet ad verificandum primum principium, quod dicatur quiditative sicut ista est vera, homos est albus vel non albus simpliciter. The validity of the principle extends not only in terms of quiddity, but also to propositions that are predicated denominatively. At the first sight, the difference is that in the latter, nothing necessary is predicated, and this predication is not coessential with the subject, but should be understood only in an attributive sense. For example, whiteness, unlike risibility, does not intrinsically belong to a man, and it's not predicable in quid with respect to him. Moreover, there cannot be a demonstration propter quid in the knowledge of God, because God, as simpliciter simplex, is indefinable. The syllogism, every man is rational animal, every rational animal is risible, every man is risible, would not be valid with regard to knowledge of God, in the sense that nothing can be said about the supreme in a quantitative sense precise understood. Moreover, theology is a science, Meron says, that does not proceed demonstratively per discursum, but relies on self-evident truths, per se nota. Speaking of being and its precise ratio, its passions are such that they are not demonstrable, although it can be shown that being is being in a denominative sense. Text number 8. Ens est objectum adequatum intellectus nostri accipiendum ens secundum totam latitudinem sue denominationis. Being is the adequate object of the intellect in a denominative sense, conceived secundum totam latitudinem sue denominationi. So, in fact, everything that is not nothing is said to be, at the end of text 8. Omne enim quod est citranil ens dicitur, sed aliquid dicitur quiditative ens, aliquid autem denominative. In his categories, Aristotle defines denominatives paronuma as predicates that designate the subject according to a name taken from a single reality and differ in inflection, like the grammarian predicate from grammar and strong from strength, or yes, courage from courageous, and so on. Building on Aristotle's definition, Boethius establishes three conditions for denomination to occur. Text 9. Ut re participet, that is, participates in a thing. Post ut nomine, that it follows a name. Postremo ut sit quedam nominis transfiguratio, that it represents a certain transformation of the name. These conditions justify a possible interpretation in terms of participation of denomination. In fact, tria sono necessaria, text number 9, yes. In the work De Grammatico, Anselm raises a question of great relevance. On one hand, Grammaticus is a substance, because every grammarian is a human, and every human is a substance. On the other, Grammaticus is a quality. A human can be understood per se and ut unum as a combination of the characteristic of which it is composed, where the first is the substantiality as the cause of the others, representing a reality that the others depend on to exist. However, the term grammaticus does not mean man and grammaticus in this sense, a single entity. Instead, per se, it refers to grammar, and per aliud to the man. According to Anselm, a term is denominative when it is the name by which a thing is commonly called. In the case of a man, such a name signifies and denotes the substance, whereas in the case of grammaticus, it signifies grammar and, through an appellatio, denotes the man. Porphyry, on the other hand, attributes an intermediate position to denominatives, resulting from the dual opposition between equivocal multivocals and univocals diversivocals. According to Porphyry, denominatives share the same name and the same definition to some extent, while differing under both aspects. These definitions of denomination appear to be familiar to Meron's, who starts from the definition of denominatives as terms that, derived from a common name, differ only in terms of inflection. In his definition, there is also a reference to the appellatio mentioned by Anselm and, furthermore, to Porphyry's doctrine. The question of interest is the relationship between denominatives, univocals, and equivocal terms. Text number 10. Illa denominativa ut patuit sint immediata, unde quandocumque denominativa sunt univoca, sic ut risibile dicitur univoce de individuis hominis, et tamen denominative, ut vult expresse Plato in Sophiste, quandocunque autem sunt equivoca, ut cum album dicitur de albo in voce et albo in corpore, et sic patet quod non condividitur illis. Denomination, therefore, can be understood both univocally, meaning by necessity, it emphasizes a connection between two formal reasons, and equivocally. Essential predicates can be denominatively predicated, as with humans, rationality or sensibility are predicated. Predication of something essential, stated in quid, occurs when a satisfactory and fitting answer is given to the question, what is it? Quid est? Alongside the predication in quid, there is the predication in quale, which depends on quality, something posterior to what is found in quid. And text number 11, et iterum definitio essentialis quantum ad differentias denominative predicatur, ut cum animal est substantia animata sensibilis et homo est animal rationale mortale. So, furthermore, essential definition with regard to denominatives differences is predicated as when animal is an animated sensible substance and man is a rational mortal animal. If there is an adjectival denominative predication, which is said of what is in quale of accident, there is also a denominative predication called by Meron's substantial. With this type of denominative predication, it is possible to predicate essential attributes, such as when a human is called animal based on animality, or a human based on the concept of humanity, and in this sense is done substantially. In fact, the animality and humanity of a human are said in quid according to a difference in case due to the concretion of the two terms, which are conversely ultimate abstracta. Text 12. Tertia difficultas est si in predicatis essentialibus, quid dicuntur in quid, puta quesunt in recta linea, est predicatio denominativa. Dicitur autem quod sic substantive, licet non adjective. Quia ab animalitate dicitur animal, et ab humanitate homo, secundum differentiam casus, sicut suo modo grammaticus. Et confirmatur, quia omne quod non est ultimate abstractum, est alico modo concretum. Given that, end of quote, given that denominative substantial predication is said of what is in quid, it is legitimate to ask what is the difference between denominative predication and proper quiditative predication. As typically, the phrase man is a rational animal is understood as proper quiditative predication. Text 13th. Quarta difficultas, quia predicatio quiditativa et denominativa videntur distingui ex opposito et ideo, cum iste sint recte quiditative non videntur denominative. Dicitur autem, quod illa quiditativa quesit in abstractione ultimata, sicut cum dicitur equinitas est tantum equinitas, distinguitor omnino contra denominativam, enim illa quesit per aliquem concretionem, sicut dicitur homo est animal, cuius concretionis signum est, quia ista non est vera, humanitas est animalitas, et ista quiditativa potest etiam distingui contra denominativa adjective factam, non substantive. So, it is possible to distinguish between quiditative predication and adjectival denominative predication, which does not predicate anything necessary. Furthermore, it becomes clear that the proper quiditative predication, in a strict sense, comes closer to a tautology, as when one says equinitas est equinitas. The animality predicated of a man, on the contrary, is concrete, in that is not pure animality predicated of pure humanity. Otherwise, in the proposition humanity is animality would be true. For animality to be predicated, therefore, It needs concretion to materialize into something different from itself in the sense of animality conceived as the ultimate abstraction. Thus, it is possible to distinguish quiditative predication of something, that is the ultimate abstraction, from denominative predication, which, as mentioned, requires concretion. Text number 14. Sed remanet difficultas, quare in predicatis essentialibus sit talis denominatio, cum sint idem essentialiter predicatum et sum subjectum, et idem non denominet se ipsum. Dicitur autem, quod in talibus secundum quod patuit in sophiste superius, est pars essentialis sui inferioris, et non idem omnino, et pars de toto non potest dici nisi secundum aliquam denominationem intelligatur. Quia nullum totum est sua pars, quamvis sit habens illam partem, ideo animal non est anima, sed animatum. In predicates of accidents, denomination should be understood in the same way it is placed in things that are in predicate of substance, as both genus and difference are the essential parts of species. Thus, white, when understood in terms of quality, is color, even though whiteness is not being colored when understood in the ultimate abstractions. Albedo is not ultimately abstract, but an intermediate state between the concrete particular, this white album, and the ultimate abstraction, which is whiteness, albedinatas. Therefore, being a simplex abstract, as it is separated from the subject, it can be said denominatively. In this sense, denomination must be understood according to the thing, even if it is not expressed in the words. When the discussion shifts from the categorical level to that of being, the question is relevant because ratio entis ultimate abstracta videtur dici de omnibus. It is essential to note that concerning predication in its general sense, Maironis consider it an act of that, while saying something about reality, is primarily mental, the predication. Non accipitur hoc solum ditio vocalis, imo principaliter mentalis, cum actus predicationis sit principaliter in intellectu, sicut actus compositionis. End of quote. There are two levels of predication, one limited to immanence and the categorical level, and the other concerning transcendentals. The first follows the division according to genus, species, differences, and so on, while the second, which pertains to transcendentals, does not adhere to this division. Predication of being falls into the second category. The challenge Mairon faces is how it is possible for there to be truth in a quiditative predication of something in its ultimate abstractions, as in the case of whiteness. It is at this point that the discussion shifts from the categorical level from that of transcendentals, such as the concept of being. Maironis acknowledges the possibility of quiditative predication in its ultimate abstraction. If, on the other hand, predicate and subject are somehow distinct, as in the case of with whiteness and this white, of which whiteness is predicated, it is not genuinely possible to make a quiditative predication of something true, unless predicate and subject coincide through a predication that say the same about the same, as in saying equinitas est equinitas, or humanitas est humanitas. Text number 15. Quarta difficultas est si in aliqua predicatio quiditativa potest esse vera in ultimata abstractione. Dicitur autem quod licet istud non videatur in predicamentis, tamen bene in transcendentibus, quia ratio entis ultimate abstracta videtur dici de omnibus. Per eo quod omnes quiditates sunt quedam entitates, nisi fiat abstractio per secundas intentiones, ut cum dicitur quod ratio formalis humanitatis non est ratio formalis entitatis. Sed revertitud difficultas. Si invenitur aliqua quiditativa predicatio in omnia abstractione ultimata. Dicitur autem quod sic, quando idem omnino dicitur de se ipso, ut cum dicitur quod equinitas est equinitas, vel humanitas est humanitas. Alioquin, ubi predicatum et subjectum sunt aliquo modo distincta, non potest unum de alio affirmare ultimata precisione cum cum ultimata precisio fiat in eo solo in quo distinguntur, et secundum tale sit remotio et non affirmatio. The distinction between denominative and quiditative predication is also present with respect to the predication of being, which can indeed be said both denominatively and quiditatively. In particular, some clarity can be derived from the fifth question of the eighth distinction of the Conflatus, where Maironis discusses these two ways of predication, and it seems to align with what has been said so far about denomination. Text number 16. Tertia notandum est quod illud quod est reale, dicitur dupliciter, quiditative scilicet et denominative. Primo modo, nihil est quod quiditative sit res, nisi realitas tantum. Secundo autem modo, scilicet denominative, dicitur de omnibus alis. Exemplum, sicut perfectiones quedam sunt essentiales, quedam notionales, ita aliqua dicuntur essentialia, alia notionalia. Sed tamen essentiale dicitur in primo modo dicendi per se et quiditative de essentia, denominative autem dicitur de alis attributis. Eodem modo dico quod homo dicitur realis propter realitates denominative, sicut existens dicitur denominative. End of quote. In this passage, it seems that denomination corresponds to non-essential predication in the second way of understanding per se, and therefore concern non-necessary attributes, such as reality, existence, when, for example, they are attributed to a human being, which is precisely denominated as real or existing in a denominative manner regarding a third term. However, this type of predication should be not misunderstood as analogous of attribution. As seen earlier, Maironis has already emphasized that in such cases we have denominative adjectival predication, which corresponds to the case of equivocation. Maironis' conception of denominatives and denomination is quite extensive, and it cannot be solely classified as equivocation. Likewise, it does not negate the possibility of univocal predication, even if it is denominative. In fact, the dual nature of denomination is emphasized once more in the sixth question of the prologues of the Conflatus. Text 17. Una quae accipitur a posteriori et ab accidente, et nunquam ista est univoca, sicut a justitia dicitur justus, alia quae essentialiter accipitur a priori, et ista potest esse univoca, quia reducibili ad primum modum dicendum, sicut predicatio generis de differentia, et sicut predicatio transcendentium, quae est vere univoca. Univoca, not univocal, yes. So the conclusion, this particular aspect of denominative predication plays an important role in the context of the possibility of having a univocal concept of ens when said of both God and creatures. It is not a quiditative predication, purely thought, but a denomination that predicates something which is still said in quid, but hence per se. In this sense, the concept of being is one and univocal when said of God a creature. However, the ratio deitatis propria is unknowable to humans because for something that is simpliciter simplex, like divine essence, it is not possible to have a proper and adequate concept. Furthermore, the divine essence is primo diversa and would only have a concept that is idem ipsum. Yeah. And what is said in quid of something holds a prior place in the order essentialis. It is not possible to imagine that if something is predicated in quid, it would be part of an essential order because essentialis pars comes before everything in that order. There is no formal ratio that precedes deitas, and it would be against it to have a quiditative concept different from its own adequate concept. According to Maironis, the order of the formalis ratio of God concerning the divine essence is not known in a natural, but always in an indistinct and confused way. Reference is Conflatus, distinction 3, question 1. Also, Maironis' division between intuitive and abstractive cognition plays an important role in what we can know of God. At last mention, without claiming to exhaust the issue, which, by the way, deserves further exploration, he considers the notizia arguitiva a cognition which starts from intuitive cognitions, the only one with which we can argue that God exists, and it is the first principle. Thanks to this process and his conception of univocity, he keeps the unsurmountable distance between God and creatures. Quidditas is a conceptual ens extra animam, while substances and accidents are extra animam but real. Properly speaking, quidditas corresponds to a formalitas which is neither produced by the soul nor a real being in a proper sense. A man's quiddity remains the same after death of the body and is the same in act and in potentiality. Um, While for Scotus, potentia obiectiva is the relation that essence of something has towards its existence, Merons defines it as potentia autem obiectiva est illa in qua esse intelligitur res antequam creentur. He also says, per quidditates non intelliguntur nisi rationes formales quidditative rerum in se. Creabilia autem sunt apta nata ad eo creari. Esse essentiae non est aliud a quidditate, quia esse essentiae est illud de quod dicitur definitio iudicat esse, non autem nisi quiditative. What concerns the potentia obiectiva does not apply to the accident of the thing, but to its proper being, and it is essentially predicable. Indeed, illud quod convenit quidditati per accidens non ponitur in potentia obiectiva et in esse quidditativo. It is necessary to emphasize the vast difference from Scotus, who would not say that quidditas is univocal, as univocity concern only the real concept and, specifically, the real concept. Being is not a quiddity. In contrast, according to Meyron, as for Bonetus, it is. Thus, quiddity itself allow to a leap. If the ultimate horizon of philosophical reflection on the predicability of being are to determine something about the knowledge of God, it seems that in the univocal conception of being according to Meyron's, we know very little. God himself is much more closer to the Aristotle's God in Book 4 of the Metaphysics, something unattainable and not determinable clearly and distinctly. Myronis seems to find a way to predicate univocity between God and creatures in order not to deal with a completely absent concept of God, saving both the distance and the proper concept, since does not posit analogy in reality. Um, the nominative predication saves univocity, but in a diminished way, because it is not about the proper concept of God, his quiddity precise. Despite this, talking about how things are in reality, he seems to support a much more strong univocity. Indeed, he posits a real concept of being, which is univocally predicated of the ens rationis, not the one dependent on the soul, and the ens extra animam. To conclude, Myronis deals with Scotus' definitions of univocity that he dropped. And this is the main reason why he has to modify the reality of the concept of being, which, against the conceptual univocity, is about reality. Not an integral reality, but a middle way where different degrees of it are considered. In this sense, the Aristotelian motto that being can be said in different ways is still valid.